Politics has contaminated the environment of the COVID-19 origins tracing study, says Dr. Marc, Executive Director of the WHO Health Emergencies Program. He told a recent news conference in Geneva that the WHO would consider, analyze and assess the current knowledge around the origins study and data from labs in other countries where possible infections were detected in late 2019. How to keep the study on the right track? Should it be prioritized over other imminent dangers posed by the virus? And how can we stay sane at a time of confusion and frustration like this? Earlier, I talked to Marc van Ranst, a renowned professor of virology at the University of Leuven, Belgium. Professor van Ranst had to spend a month in a safe house after a gunman threatened to kill him. Professor Marc van Ranst, thank you very much for joining us today. Could you help us understand what is your understanding of the possible origin of SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, and the basis on which you draw a conclusion or your assessment?
Well, we know that most of the viruses that become zoonotic or that are going to infect us come from animals. There is a very large reservoir in different animals, specifically in bats, of different viruses and certainly coronaviruses. So that's the most likely hypothesis. And definitely in the beginning, it all fitted in the phylogenetic trees. These are the evolutionary trees that you can make when you have all the different viruses that are known and your novel virus. In the end, I think we will never know exactly where it came from, but a natural origin to me is the most likely hypothesis.
Why do you think that maybe in the end we will never know the exact origins of this virus?
It's very hard because you always work with an incomplete history. You have the virus that we know now, you have the virus that we knew a year ago, which is already different, and then you have relatives of the virus that were already known in bats, but you never know that you have the complete history. Is it theoretically possible that a laboratory was involved and that when working in a laboratory, a virus contaminated the laboratory co-worker? Everything is possible. In the end, does it matter all that much? It is interesting, but we have to face the pandemic that we have at hand, and the origin is of interest to know, but is not of the utmost importance to me.
So just now, I would like you to say a little bit more, because right now you say everything is possible, that it could also have come from a lab, but on the other hand, you also said you believe in the beginning of this conversation, you say you believe, like most coronavirus, this came from the nature. So how should people understand exactly where do you think the virus came from?
I think they should first of all understand the relative importance of knowing where exactly it came from. I mean, handling the crisis at hand is much more important than knowing the origin, although I will immediately admit that knowing the origin is nice to know. But we might never know. The laboratory origin is a possibility, but to me a remote possibility, because nature is the biggest bioterrorist we know. The reservoir in nature of different viruses, and most certainly of coronaviruses also, is vast, is really extensive. So that to me is always the most likely hypothesis.
So where do you suggest that the next phase of origin study to be focused on? Because as we know, it is a gigantic project and you only have certain possibility to group people from different parts of the world to come to do, a certain period of study. Let's not forget the virus is still among us. So going forward in the most practical manner and trying to get a breakthrough or some kind of progress in the work, where do you suggest people follow up on?
Well, first of all, I think we should determine if looking for the origin of this very important virus is the most important thing we need to do. I can live with the uncertainty that we have right now. I believe very much in the One Health hypothesis, where human and animal viruses are part of a bigger picture. So knowing where the virus is coming from is one thing. Looking in nature for different reservoirs, also for other viruses in nature, is always an interesting thing to do.
So are you suggesting that maybe people shouldn't be devoting so much resources, so much time and energy into finding the origins of COVID-19? Instead, they should probably prioritize on what to do to fight the virus at the moment, or how to prepare for the next one?
I think these are more important questions. We have to admit that at a certain point in time, this became a political issue. Mixing science and politics is very often unavoidable, but is hardly ever the most interesting way to go forward.
As you said, it is very inevitable that politics will get into the way, because scientists don't live in a vacuum. So going forward, are there any practical suggestions as to how to organize the work, or how to do the work so that politics can be kept at a minimum level as possible?
With a pandemic of this size, it's probably impossible to keep the politics out. Everybody is involved, everybody is interested, and everybody can score political points by supporting one hypothesis over the other. As scientists, that's rather boring. They're more overwhelming and interesting questions that can be solved, I think.
What would be one such interesting or one question that you are personally dedicated to at this moment?
At this moment, I think it is very important to estimate how long it takes for a virulent virus such as this one to become much like its predecessors, OC43, 229E, and L63, HKU1, the other coronaviruses, how long it takes to become less pathogenic. The other coronaviruses, they probably started with a pandemic and then ultimately became common cold viruses. It's going to be very interesting to know or to estimate when this would happen with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So it will go that way, but we don't know when.
So basically, you want to know when can we get our lives back to normal as much as it can be?
I think that's of interest to a lot of people in the world, I think. We know where the virus will end up, and that will be probably a common cold virus. But the transition from being a fairly pathogenic virus to a non-pathogenic or hardly more than a nuisance kind of virus, how long that takes, we don't know. For OC43, we think that the pandemic started in 1890. We know now that OC43 is a common cold virus. We know that already in the 1960s it was a common cold virus. But we do not know where, in between 1890 and 1960, where the virus made the transition suddenly, slowly, we don't know, from pathogenic to common cold category.
But that sounds a bit scary. That would sound a bit scary to some people, because you're talking about a span of 70 years, and right now people are already fatigued of the kind of, widespread of cases or restriction to our travel to our lives.
I know. But you can already see that we're dealing with this pandemic in a much better way now. A fair proportion of the world is vaccinated. That proportion is too small and leaves too many opportunities for the virus to mutate into variants. But if you take a step back, then you normally expect variants to become less pathogenic. There is no evolutionary advantage for the virus to be pathogenic, to be transmissible, for sure, yes.
People would want to get rid of it, yeah.
Right. If a virus is extremely pathogenic, then that's not going to work, because then people will take notice and prepare for it and whatever. Whereas highly transmissible viruses, that's from the viewpoint of the virus, that is much more interesting.
Again, I want to talk about the kind of hype that has been surrounding the lab leak hypothesis because as many scientists talk about only a possibility but a very low probability of the virus coming out of a lab. There has been, if you read some international media, a very strong statement, very strong allegations and very strong questions asked as, you know, even pointing finger or insinuating that this is some kind of a human error on the part of some authorities. How do you look at the debate that has been developing on that front?
I follow that debate, but I must admit it doesn't carry my interest all that much. It sure will be of interest to some people. It sure will be serving political agendas left and right. But ultimately, my basic attitude is to trust people. My basic attitude is definitely to trust scientists wherever they live. However, I'm not naive. I know that many scientists work for military organizations, for armies, and they also work with viruses. Some are great colleagues, but some are also colleagues that will not completely tell you what they are doing. But other than that, I don't believe much in a malignant sort of plan. Human errors can always happen. They happen all the time. But that being part of a plan to have sort of a deliberate release, that seems extremely unlikely.
Yeah, maybe not just about a deliberate release, but because they're pushing this lab accident theory as well. Because you also talked about, you know, the possibility, but the kind of discussion that I've had with scientists on this aspect, some from an evolutionary point of view, talking about even the lab leak hypothesis is extremely unlikely, and yet that has been very much pushed to the fore in some very influential papers, media as well. So on that front, I don't know what is your opinion, if you have one.
When you look at the evolutionary trees that are based on the sequences of the different viruses that were known, our laboratory made some of these phylogenetic trees in the early days. At that point, nothing pointed to anything but a natural origin. And since then, I've seen hardly any evidence that would point into another direction.
You have received, let me focus on you and what you have gone through a little bit. You have been a primary person responsible for COVID-19 response in Belgium, at least one of the top scientists, but you have personally received even death threats, I understand, and you have been getting protection. Could you help us understand why there is so much distrust and even hostility towards scientists who are trying to do their job?
Well, first of all, it's a fringe phenomenon. It's probably less than 1% of the population that thinks that way. However, thanks to social media, they find each other and they can fantasize about all kinds of weird ways of killing you. And then, yes, at a certain period, I received death threats daily. Most of them were not serious, but some could not be disregarded, and they were forwarded to the police. And then a couple of months ago, there was a serious threat by a person from the army, extreme right wing, who had stolen weapons from the armory, and who we now know was in my street waiting for me to come home.
Oh, wow.
Except that was one of the two occasions in the past 18 months where I was home early, before 5 o'clock. So he was waiting there in vain.
Oh, wow.
And then also left and later killed himself. But that led to my family and I being in a safe house for a month under heavy protection.
Wow. Can you understand exactly what drives people to, you know, have such extreme opinion, even taking on such extreme actions?
I don't know. I think this is, of course, a pandemic that affects all people in different ways. And some people are extremely unsure. Some people are extremely upset. Others are extremely scared. And some people take another route of becoming overly aggressive. It's their way of handling this situation, which is very confusing for everybody. And they take a misguided route, as far as I'm concerned. The problem with social media now is that they find each other and they can reinforce
Right.
their beliefs, whereas 30 years ago, they would be sitting at a bar talking to somebody else who was probably not going to listen to them, and that would be the end of it. Now you can have really conspiracy theories about everything, and you always find other people who will believe in your specific conspiracy theory.
And finding the echo chamber on social media where such voices can converge and be amplified and spiral. So that's really unfortunate.
Exactly.
Yeah. I hope things are getting slightly more peaceful, more secure for you and your family at this moment.
Well, we're not easily scared, so that definitely helps. So if you keep a level-headed approach to this, then that's okay. We'll get through that.
Thank you so much, Professor Marc von Ranst, and stay safe and all the very best. Thank you once again.
Thank you much.